If you abandon the pursuit of your joy, you cannot love others. Because love, by definition for the Apostle Paul, is not the raw performance of duty by willpower. It is the overflow of joy in God, or the pursuit of expanded joy in the meeting of others' needs. If you say, I don't care about that joy, I'm indifferent toward the pursuit of that joy, then you're going to be indifferent to an essential element of love, and therefore won't be a virtuous person.
Why is love more than just action? In this episode of Light and Truth, John Piper explores 2 Corinthians 8, showing that true love flows from joy in God and transforms generosity into heartfelt expression of love. This sermon was originally given at Trinity Baptist Church in Wheaton, Illinois on September 20th, 1988.
Father, would you assist us now to set our mind's attention and our heart's affection on things that are invisible. For the things that are invisible are eternal. Grant, I pray, that you would reveal to us that through all the afflictions of our lives and whatever it costs us to follow you in the path of Calvary love, are working for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And so I pray that when we hear what you call us to do, we would not turn back with fear. Rather, may we fear him who can throw both soul and body into hell, the great displeasure of your judgment. May we flee to your open arms and walk with Jesus in the path of love. Lord, reveal to us what a joy that is, both now and in the age to come. And I ask it in his great name. Amen. Let me try to sum up where we've been now in the past 2 nights and then work our way into tonight. The first night we were together, I argued that the greatest heart for God in the universe is God's heart. That God is passionately concerned with his own reputation, his glory, his name, and that in all that he does in redemptive history, he does to magnify his glory, to display his worth, to preserve his honor in the world. And then the next point we made was that even though this sounds very self-centered and therefore unloving to many people, it isn't unloving. It's the foundation of God's love, because in preserving and displaying his glory, he is preserving for us and displaying to us that which satisfies our hearts most deeply. So he's the one being in all the universe for whom self-exaltation is the highest virtue and the most loving act. Nobody else may follow him in this way. But rather, we glorify God by delighting in him, by letting him be God, exalt himself, and finding ourselves drawn up into God as we enjoy what he preserves for us in pursuing our praise of his glory. So it's not loving, it's fulfilling. And that led us to last night's message, which was, then the implication would be, if we would glorify God most, we must delight in him most. And if I can remember, the sentence that we used both in the Wheaton Chapel and last night was, I won't get it just right. When you are most satisfied in God, he is most glorified in you. Yes, that's the sentence. When you are most satisfied in God, he is most glorified in you. Therefore, if you try to abandon the quest for satisfaction and joy and happiness in God, you strive against the glory of God. You put yourself in opposition to his eternal purposes to exalt his own name. That was last night. Now, the question for tonight is, can that be carried through on the horizontal level I find that it's easier to persuade people that hedonism of this variety is true on the vertical axis of our lives, namely that we ought to pursue joy in God, and that glorifies God, because when you drink of a fountain and say, "Ah," the fountain is not offended. But when I get down to the horizontal level and say, as I'm going to say tonight, in fact, I'll state my thesis now, the pursuit of pleasure is an essential motive for every good deed. And, to put it another way, if you try to abandon the pursuit of full and lasting pleasure, you cannot love people or please God. This I find a little harder to convince people of. So let me say it again. I can state it negatively and positively. The pursuit of pleasure, joy, happiness, fulfillment, satisfaction, is an essential motive for every good deed. It's very different from what we are customarily taught, I think, namely that you must, in order to be loving, forsake the pursuit of your own pleasure. Or to put it the other way, to the degree that you succeed in abandoning the quest for your own pleasure, to that degree you cannot love people or glorify or please God. So that's what I want to try to argue for tonight from Scripture. And if you have Bibles, I'm going to invite you to look at more text tonight than I have in the past. So if you would like to turn with me, we're going to begin with 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, in the context of these two chapters, 8 and 9, are a fundraising effort on Paul's part. He writes to the church at Corinth, uses the church at Macedonia as an example of generosity, and tries to motivate them to be generous too in the collection that he's taking up for the poor saints in Jerusalem. Now I want you to try to define love with me on the basis of chapter 8 and a few verses here. And the reason I go here is because what we have in chapter 8 is one of the clearest illustrations of a lived out love. Not an abstract definition of love, but love in action. So I'm going to read the first two verses with you of this chapter and then drop down and read verse 8. We want you to know, brethren, about the grace of God which has been shown in the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of liberality on their part. Now, verse 8. I say this not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others, namely the Macedonians, that your love also is genuine. Now, the reason I pick up verse 8 is to get the word love in the equation here. He's saying your love also should be genuine, like their love was genuine. Well, where is their love described? Their love is described in verses 1 and 2. So what we have in verses 1 and 2 is a living illustration of what the apostle regards true love to be. And I want us to analyze it very carefully, because when I say that if you abandon the pursuit of your own pleasure, you can't love people, I have to get a definition of love that allows for that. And that's backwards in a sense. I worked through this because of seeing definitions of love like this in the Bible. Let's look at it. I see 3 or 4 elements. Number 1, love results from God's grace. Verse 1, we want you to know about the grace of God which has been shown in the churches of Macedonia. So what was visible to the eye in the liberality of these Christians was grace in action that had been poured vertically down from God into the hearts of these people. That's point number 1. Very, very essential. Point number 2, this experience of God's grace filled up the Macedonians with an abundance of joy. You see that in verse 2. In a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty overflowed. So the second point is when the grace came down, the joy filled up. Somebody will write a song about this, I'm sure, some of these days. And the third point is their abundant joy spilled over into liberality or generosity of giving money to the poor saints in Jerusalem. So you can see that at the end of verse 2, can't you? Their extreme poverty and joy, their abundance of joy, overflowed in a wealth of liberality. Now that's a beautiful visual picture of what happened when they got converted and the church was formed, and then Paul came and asked them to donate some money for the poor saints. Grace came down, joy came up to the brim, and then it spilled over like that, horizontally, toward people who had a greater need than they had. Now notice in verse 4 that this spillover was not under any constraint. These were not people who were in any way being arm wrestled into giving. Verse 4 says, they begged Paul earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Now this is almost incredible. You just can't imagine such a thing, can you? That at the end of a service, having taken an offering, the people would say, don't let us go. Please take another offering up, which is exactly what that verse says. It's just almost beyond comprehension. We mustn't get the idea that liberality and generosity was a dutiful caving in to a principle that they didn't want to conform to, but they knew they had to because they were Christians. That's the furthest thing from this context, isn't it? That they are somehow mustering up dutiful willpower to give their tithes and offerings because they're Christians and there's some poor people, and Christians are supposed to have concern for poor people. That's not the way it was. When my boys say at the amusement park, oh, Daddy, can we ride it again? Can we please ride the roller coaster again? I don't assume that they're operating on some moral principle that's driving them to do this out of a sense of duty, which is what they were doing. They were just begging Paul, please, would you let us give again, Paul? So I'm assuming that they're doing what they want to do. What they want to do. Their joy is spilling over here. And notice, by the way, that the grace of God in their lives did not eliminate their poverty. It made them generous in poverty. At least that's all we see in this text. That these were people who were still in poverty, and yet they had been made rich. We'll read that just a few verses later down in chapter 8, because Christ had become poor for them, and they had been made rich in good deeds, as Paul says in 1 Timothy. To be sure, at this point of love, they were denying themselves something, weren't they? If they were poor, and they were generous, and they begged to give more than they'd be given, then you know they had gone home, and husband had talked it over with the wife, and they had said, look, we can't afford this. If we give more tomorrow, we won't be able to buy. You fill in the blank now. What are you about to buy? They just said, we won't be able to buy it. And they looked at each other and said, let's give anyway. Let's give this time. Come on, look what God's done for us. And they got so happy and so confident in God that they just denied the toy they were about to buy their child, maybe. I mean, none of you here probably is very poor. But put yourself in the position of a poor person talking like this. It's a poor person who to get just the food on the table and a really special toy at Christmas time for the child is a special thing. And they must have denied themselves something very significant in order to carry through with this generosity that Paul stresses came from their poverty and their joy. Now, how would you define love on the basis of what we've seen? Let me try to put it in a sentence. Love is the overflow of joy in God which meets the needs of others. That's my definition. Love is the overflow of joy in God. Now there I get the God word side. Love is the overflow of joy in God that then meets the needs of others. Or, now if I had desiring God to write over again, I would add this sentence. I learn as I talk to people about ways to say things better. There is a little something missing from that definition. And my good friend and mentor, Dr. Fuller, pressed me on it. He said, John, that's too passive. It sounds too automatic. There is in love a questing and a pursuit of something that just doesn't seem to be caught by that sentence. And so here's this, I don't think the sentence is wrong. I just don't think it goes far enough now. And so I'm going to add this sentence. Love is the effort, underline it, the effort to increase your joy in God by extending it to others. Now that's in the book, but it's sort of hidden away in a kind of out-of-the-way place. Love is the effort to multiply or increase or double my joy in God by extending it to others. And you all know that phenomenon, that a shared joy is a doubled joy. When you're prevented from sharing a great and good thing that has filled you up with others, it goes sour on you if you can't let it out somehow. And so I want to add that effort or questing or pursuit dimension. Love is the overflow of joy in God, but that overflow has in it a kind of desire that the joy really be embraced by others, because when it's embraced by others, my joy is increased in God. I also mentioned last night this whole issue of whether or not love is a feeling, and pointed to Joseph Fletcher's book, The Situation Ethics, where he said it's not a feeling because it can be commanded, and I rejected that. And I want to pick up on that now tonight and say it's not simple enough to say love is just action that you do for somebody's good when you might hate their guts or feel no inclination to do it except raw willpower. Now, I do believe that when you are driving down a Minnesota freeway and it's 40 below zero wind chill, and somebody has a flat tire, and you're dead tired, and it's late, and your wife is waiting for you at home, and you don't feel like stopping to help, you ought to stop. By willpower, if you have to. Teeth-gritting willpower. But, I said to somebody, as we were talking about this last night, there is a difference between the way you do that as a Christian hedonist and the way you do it as somebody who is a duty-oriented person. A Christian hedonist sees that situation, and as soon as he senses the lack of inclination to stop and help and love, he repents. He confesses sin immediately and says, I'm sorry that I'm so disinclined to be a good Samaritan here. But Lord, I have the wherewithal, at least by the willpower you've given me, to stop. Would you please work the miracle, even as I operate on sort of automatic pilot? Would you please restore to me the joy of love and grant to me to experience genuine, heartfelt concern for this person, so that as I drive away and get home tonight, I will be rejoicing that I've stopped and that good has been done in your name. Now that's the Christian hedonist way of overcoming disinclination to good. The other way would be to say feelings don't matter. Just forget it. You've done the right thing and feelings don't matter. And I think that's wrong. Now, why do I think that's wrong? I want to take you to 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13:3 says, if I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Now here's what I draw out of that verse. Love is always more than action. Not less, but more. Because Jesus said, greater love has no man than this, than that he lay down his life for his friends. This verse says you can lay down your life for your friends and not have any love at all. So to put those two together, you have to say, what more must there be when you lay down your life for your friends? What is the element of there? And it's something more than raw action. Raw action never is equated with love. That verse, I think, demonstrates that. So let's go back to the Macedonians and ask, well, what's missing in raw action? Paul did not hold up the Macedonians in 2 Corinthians 8. He did not hold up the Macedonians in 2 Corinthians 8 as examples of love because they were generous. He held them up as examples of love because they were gladly generous. Because they had been rejoicing and filled up with the grace of God, and their abundance of joy in poverty overflowed. And when he saw that, he said, that's what I'm after. That's what God's after when he commands us to love one another. Not the raw willpower that is generous out of a sense of duty. So my definition of love then is that love is the overflow of joy or delight in God's grace that goes out to meet the needs of others, or love desires to expand once it's been filled. It's like I think I used the analogy in the book of a weather high pressure zone. When a high pressure zone meets a low pressure zone, and this is a needy person, what is created? Wind is created, draft. It goes, it's like this. The high pressure zone begins to expand to fill the low pressure zone. And I asked, now what's the moral name of that wind? And the answer is love. So love is, you're moving from a high pressure zone of somebody who is God besotted, like Jonathan Edwards would say, and they move near to a need, and immediately the draft that is created to fill the need and meet the need is called love. But really what's happening is the expanding of this joy. There's something in joy that wills to expand itself to include as many people as possible. Now I hope you can see why the thesis that I stated at the beginning, it included this sentence: if you abandon the pursuit of your joy, you cannot love others. Because love, by definition for the Apostle Paul, is not the raw performance of duty by willpower. It is the overflow of joy in God, or the pursuit of expanded joy in the meeting of others' needs. If you say, I don't care about that joy, I'm indifferent toward the pursuit of that joy, then you're going to be indifferent to an essential element of love, and therefore won't be a virtuous person.
This is Light and Truth, God-centered preaching to help you see Christ clearly and treasure Him truly. I'm your host, Dan Kruver. Thank you for listening. On our next episode, John Piper continues our 10-part series, A Heart for God, with a sermon titled, Cheerful Obedience. I hope you'll join us. For more resources, visit desiringgod.org.